Welcome along to the How You Say It podcast with myself, Graham Kilgour, and we are joined in the salubrious surroundings of the Gleneagles Townhouse in Edinburgh by a man who's not only just played international rugby for his country, but he's captained it as well, moved into leadership, executive coaching, team building, communication, motivational speaker. Rory, is there anything you can't do?
Plenty. You've named a few things that I'm okay at, but there's plenty that I'm rubbish at.
Well, I've got Rory Lawson here, a man whose voice you might be familiar with if you've been listening or watching any rugby over the last, how many years have you been on the commentary team now?
Well, I've been out the game for 10, so not far off that.
Yeah, so it's fantastic to get you here, Rory, and obviously talking about communication. And a man who's, as I said, represented your country at the top level at international rugby and then captained them. You must know a thing or two about communicating and leadership.
Yeah, I'd like to think so. Albeit, always learning. I think one of the key things is that when you look at it, communication, you've always got to keep moving the dial, and there is no single way of communicating that lands with everybody. If you're delivering a message in one manner, some people it will land with 100%. Others it may not land with. Yeah. So I think that's one of the great things about communication is understanding who's your audience, who are you trying to land things with, and communication is also two ways because it is about talking, but also there's a massive part of communications about listening. So and that carries across the board from broadcasting to on-field communication to business communication to keynote speaking, all of that stuff. You've got to have that dynamic between what are you listening, what are you hearing, and then what are you saying. Absolutely.
I mean, whenever you speak to somebody who started out in sport and who became a professional sportswoman, athlete, it's always interesting to see where was the starting point for that. Now, you grew up in a household that was surrounded by sport because not only was your grandfather, the great Bill McLaren, was known as the voice of rugby. He was a PE teacher down in the Borders, a rugby coach at one point as well. But also your own father was a professional rugby player as well. So being in that environment, was that just a destined path for you to follow in the family footsteps, so to speak?
Well, I suppose so. When I reflect back, Papa, if you're talking communications, one of the great public communicators when it comes to sitting behind a mic. Didn't necessarily love it when he was in front of a crowd. Right. So actually, he was still brilliant at it, but that wasn't his comfort zone. Dad really, was an amateur international rugby player at that time, because obviously rugby only went professional long after his career ended. But he was an international rugby player with Scotland, played a load of times for the Barbarians, but also whilst doing a job. And he worked himself into senior roles in businesses whereby he was leading teams, and therefore communication was a factor. But I guess, communication for me growing up was the warmth of being at home, so around mum and dad and big brother Gregor, younger sister Lynn's, and the typical. If I was to sum it up, it was positive. There was positivity to the communication that you got in amongst the telling offs for being a little shit at times. Pardon my French, but I think on the whole, one big thing from my learnings is this kind of optimist, positive outlook that mum and dad had on life in general, and therefore that I kind of grew around. And that's one of the ways that I think one of the things that I think I bring when I reflect back now with the leadership work that I do, that probably limited me at times, because I'd find positive in times whereby sometimes you've got it in sport or in studies or whatever relationships, whereby you've actually got to call things out for not being okay. Stop trying to find the good when actually things aren't good. So that's, it's one of the things that, again, reflecting, evolving over time, you kind of learn and adjust along the way.
Absolutely. I mean, like you've mentioned your grandfather, your Papa, Bill McLaren, and as we've said, that the voice of sport, the voice of rugby in many households, even to this day, the clips that we see that we're now, as we're recording this, it was the first week of the Six Nations, and you can't go the Six Nations without seeing an old clip of something happening, a try being scored, and the commentary over it is your grandfather's voice. It's something that everybody reflects back and remembers those great times. I remember well, what was it? It was the try that Scotland scored in 1999 from kickoff against Wales at Murrayfield. It was
John Leslie.
John Leslie. I remember that really, really well. And as a youngster watching that, it was just incredible. But for a man who dedicated so much time to the sport, it was really about the preparation that he put in before. That's the stories that everyone talks about. I've heard people saying about he would even be down to look at the shape. They would go down to training to see even the shapes and sizes of each individual player, so that he would know from the commentary gantry in the stadiums, he would be able to recognise somebody who was maybe on the ground or who didn't have their back to him, so he couldn't see the number, but he'd be able to see a distinctiveness about them. Was it playing cards he used as well to try and memorise players' names? And of course, the famous sort of preparation sheets, the big sheets that you would have with this tiny little scrolled writing. How important when you were growing up, was that emphasised to you about the preparation that he would put in, the work that he actually put in, so that for those hour and a halves on a Saturday or Sunday afternoon, he would be able to commentate the way he did?
Well, it's fundamental. It was right at the core of him as a person, and driven through this idea of serving other people. So he was driven. He went to World War II as a 21-year-old to serve his country. He came back, contracted tuberculosis, found himself initially in journalism, and then got pulled in when someone fell sick to commentate on a game. This was 50 years prior to him finishing his career. But for him, I guess it's framed by mindset. So his mindset was he needs to serve the audience in delivering what they need on a Saturday afternoon. And I often talk with businesses about the values of the business, the core values. And typically when you look around, or the mission of businesses, and you look around and you see how much the behaviors within the organization reflect the desired mission and vision that you want everyone to latch onto. Now, Papa was not necessarily an employee of the BBC, but he was very loyal to the BBC for over 50 years. And the BBC's mantra is inform, educate, and entertain.
Right.
So for him, his role became, he needed to have done the preparation that allowed him to inform, educate, and entertain the people who are watching the game. And boy, did he do that well. But it comes from preparation. He would, long before professional commentary, he would prepare like a professional, because he knew within himself that he wanted to be the best commentator around and deliver the best commentary that he could. And you mentioned it started on the Monday of a match week, whereby the teams wouldn't have been named, but he was already starting to do the preparation into the history of the fixture, the key people, what had happened in the previous weeks leading into it that may become part of the narrative on the day. He would then, when the teams were named, he'd start getting into the detail of the players, what they looked like, the running gait, whether they taped their heads or their knees, because bearing in mind that when he first started commentary, he wouldn't have had a monitor in the commentary box. So a lot of the time he's having to judge and make calls on people from 70 metres away or however far away he would be in the commentary box. So he needed that small detail. And it was on radio that he would have learned his trade. Yeah. So by the dynamic of a radio means that you've got to be able to get into the detail of being able to bring to life the picture that he saw through his eyes and allow people listening in to see that same picture. So that was where, the preparation that he put into things gave him that platform. And then it was the uniqueness of his voice and his turn of phrase and the way that he could, weave the rich tapestry of a game of sport. And to be brutally honest, at times a rubbish game of sport, but he made it entertaining and engaging for people who were listening or watching, because he viewed that as being his job. And I think the preparation was right at the core of everything, and it allowed him to go and deliver what was needed. And you mentioned the big sheets. The big sheets have over 1,000 pieces of data and information on them that he may need to dip into at times. A lot of it was the writing down of that information gave a process of going into his mind. So by doing that and then reflecting on it, reading on it, and preparing for the game, he would get that information in. And then on occasion, he would need to dip in and look at a stat that he knew was in there that maybe wasn't something that he thought he'd use, but he knew he had in his back pocket, and then he'd dig into it. And I think that's just the amazing part of it. And one of the great things that I've seen, you talk about legacy, and Papa's still referred to as the voice of rugby, but I speak to, I've spoken since to guys like Nick Mullins and Andrew Cotter and Miles Harrison, Mark Robson, and lots of these commentators who were, I guess, the next cab off the rank or close behind, and they now prepare, albeit with some modern nuances. Prepare in a similar way,
of course,
and I think it says everything you need to know about Papa.
Absolutely. I mean, one of the things I really like, I was at a tour at Murrayfield last year, and they've still got the bust of your grandfather, your Papa, at the front door, because one of the things that he would do is he would be at the front door at Murrayfield welcoming the teams, and again, it was him almost getting a close-up look at who people were and being able to sort of say, that's your so-and-so, I know who you are, that's what you look like, and things like that. When you look back then, you've mentioned the word reflection quite a lot of the time, and reflection is really, really important. But when you're a youngster growing up around that, it's easy to take that for granted. And then when you get older and you enter the world that you're in, it's particularly now when you leave the professional game and you're in the sort of the big bad world out of sport, so to speak, did it give you a completely new appreciation for that hard work that he put in? And was it something that you wanted to carry on into your life throughout the world after sport?
Yeah, well, I guess if I start with the reflection bit, I was rubbish at it. It's a learned practice. I think the nature of being young and growing up is you're always looking for what's next, and then actually when you come into sport, it was about, right, you've just played a game. The reflection is, what was that performance like? How do I get better? Move on. But you were always forward thinking, next challenge, how do I get better? Next challenge, how do I get better? Win or lose, how do we get better? But in that regard, I was poor at times at being in the moment and reflecting on what had happened, other than where do I get better? Or what did I do not so well that I could improve or for next time? And in many ways, if I look back at my sporting career, I would have been better if I had taken more time to pause and reflect and reset and go again. And then the biggest area that I look at that's past is actually when I got injured and went from sport one day to not sport the next day. I didn't take the time and prioritize reflecting on what had happened. I was immediately into, Christ, like, I'm in this new world. What am I going to do? How do I move as fast as I can in that world? And actually, that's something where if I had my time again, that would be the time at which I would go back. Now, knitting that into, Papa and the environment I grew up in, Dad playing international rugby, Papa doing his thing, so much support from family around my ambitions and so on, looking up to my brother, who was a great athlete. Yeah. He was at Heriots when I joined Heriots from school. He was at Edinburgh Uni, at the same time. So he's 3 years older than me. So it has guided me a lot through all of that stuff. But I think I knew when I came out of sport that I wanted to stay in the sport in some way, shape or form, and I knew that was going to be an opportunity if it arose in the media. And as part of the press release of finishing up my career, I detailed my desire to stay involved in the game through broadcast. And as it turned out, I was lucky enough to get an opportunity with Sky, who had the Premiership and the Championship at the time, and got an opportunity there to go and do some stuff. And from there, it's some people think that it's my job, because it is public facing. It's now something that I've got a huge passion for. I love doing. It's a privilege, to coin Papa's comment at the end when reflecting on his career in broadcasting. What's the best thing about the career? I didn't have to pay to go to major sports events, right? Yeah. And that's, it's a real privilege to do that. but there are very few people who get to do it as their job nowadays, and it's always got to be something for me that is something I'm passionate about. I love doing. I really feel a responsibility in trying to deliver a high quality product to whoever's listening or watching, to allow them to enjoy whatever happens on field to a little bit greater extent.
I mean, it's interesting. We spoke to Pat Nevin, and he talked about when he was writing his books, and he said that same thing as yourself. When you're in that high performance sporting environment, you never look back. You've always got to look forward. When you finish the game, as you've mentioned, it's win, lose, draw. You're on to it's next week. It's next week. It's next week. Until he sat down and he said, writing a book and being able to actually look back and enjoy moments. And he said that maybe he looks back and said, should have enjoyed it more at the time, or sometimes in difficult situations, he's maybe able to go back and say, I could have handled that better if I'd had a bit more time to deal with that. You work now in business, but you also work in sport. You've taken the context of sport into business, and you sometimes take the context of business into sport. From your own personal experiences, how important is it to then try and get that into the culture of sportsmen and women to say, you need to look back at times. It can't always be about the next game. You've got to spend a bit of time on reflection because it helps you grow and develop as a person.
Yeah, I think it's massive. I think for sports people, having been in that scenario, as much as anything, if you let's put it into three pillars: living in the past or reflecting on things that have happened, being present and in the moment, and then looking forwards. Only when you're doing the training are you typically in that moment, or you're playing games, are you typically in that moment. Otherwise, you're sort of thinking about what's just happened, or thinking about what's going to happen. And it's the nature of it. You've got to, if you're on field in sport, you've got to be present, focusing on the next job. As a decision maker, you've also got to be anticipating what might happen and shape your decisions around that. But I don't know. I speak with a number of the current players and former players, and everybody's a bit different. I would just you hear Johnny Wilkinson talk, and he was always looking about the next thing, and occasionally reflected back. And I think it's all, to say you get as much joy or you're as present in the moment doing the dishes as you ever, as you are doing something that you're really passionate about. Like, it would take me a long distance to get there. Yeah. And I'm not sure that's necessarily, like, I'm quite happy with doing the dishes being a chore. And something that I don't enjoy. Yeah. But it's a necessary thing. I just think that for the current crop of players, there's a natural tendency, if you pause to think about what might be next, that you get into what happens after a career, which is anxiety inducing. Of course. Because for most people, they don't have a Scooby-Doo what the next bit is going to be. And I think that's a big challenge. And equally preparing for that. So if you think about anybody who wants to master their trade, if they're inviting in something else to do that may prepare them better for when that trade is no longer needed for them, the danger is that they think they take their eye off the ball of the thing that they're trying to master. But it is such a necessary thing. The number of guys now that, what you do now away from the sport, and it's, obviously, for those who with kids or partners, wives, whatever it may be, you need to put energy in there as well. Yeah. But being able to try and safeguard that cliff edge, try and smooth out what is a cliff edge when you leave sport, and having been there and walked that path and jumped off the cliff edge, it's a challenge. It
certainly is, and as you said, you've been in there, and in the scrum half position, if you make a bad pass, the next ruck or the next scrum, you can't think about the bad pass that you've just done. You've just got to move on to the next one. You mentioned Johnny Wilkinson, and you see even like Finn Russell playing for Scotland, and it's been sort of highlighted in the Six Nations Full Contact documentary on Netflix, which your voice features on occasionally as well. But they always talk about if Finn Russell makes a mistake, you'll just see him laughing and smiling because he tries to put that behind him and move on to the next one. But at the same time, trying to encourage people who have been trained to just forget about it, move on to the next thing, and work on the next thing, to actually have to be thinking about moving that reflection process and also thinking ahead. It's a real big challenge, and that's a sort of, that'll make a massive mindset shift as well for people as well, wouldn't it?
But it's also got to be collective.
Yeah.
You know, I think it's really easy to say, "Oh, flush it." You know, you've made a mistake, flush it, next job. But actually, you know, as human beings, we're not wired that way. You know, we don't like making mistakes. We don't like failing. So naturally, we attach ourselves onto that, and it's very difficult just to flush it and move on to the next thing. So, and this is, you know, if you link it into culture, leadership, teamship, whatever it is, the mindset has to be shared across the team, because you need to know that if you're letting it go, that there's not somebody else on your team who's holding a grudge and is pissed off and is thinking about the mistake you just made that may compromise the team. And that's the same and you know, you talk about psychological safety. You know, the ability to make mistakes in whatever environment and not feel like you're going to be punished for it is something that you see. High performing teams there's a psychologically safe environment. In high performing sport, much like in business, I see the high performing teams are one whereby there's an expectation, there are standards set that everybody is pushing for. There's also an acknowledgement that if you're pushing hard, mistakes will be made.
Of course.
And that there needs to be that environment to be able to speak up at times and make mistakes at times. But it is such a difficult dynamic to achieve. You know, there's got to be a whole lot of trust within there. Communication is a big factor within there. You know, you've got to have that dialogue and communication within people that makes the implicit things explicit, and you get them out on the table, and you're candid, and people are allowed to talk about, you know, where they are at any given moment. None of us are bulletproof. We need to be able to share vulnerabilities, and that's actually something that, you know, Rory Best talking about how we shape the sports programs from business. He actually highlighted that vulnerability in leadership was one of his greatest strengths. The ability to speak up and say you don't know, you don't have the answers, go to other people and find out what the answers might be. Get everyone around the table and say, I've not got the answer for this, let's spitball some ideas and find out a collective answer. And that gave him the tools to then step forwards and make a decision at the time. But it's something that lots of people view vulnerability as weakness, and I don't think that needs to be the case.
And do you see that more in sport or business now? Because it's Kianis is the business that you have, that then what you're doing is effectively you work in sport, and you also work in the business world as well, in executive positions, and you work with teams to grow teamwork, culture, and executive coaching and stuff like that. So do you think, are people becoming more vulnerable in the business world? Is that a faster acceleration of that, or do you see it more in the sporting environment?
It differs. Like all of these things, it differs from individual to individual and team to team and business to business and culture to culture. The one thing that I would say is that we prioritize providing an environment whereby people can build comfort in being vulnerable. And that doesn't happen straight away. You know, for us going into work with a new team or a new individual, you've got to build trust. You've got to create an environment whereby people feel comfort and safety in where they are to be able to share vulnerabilities. And that takes time, but we try and do that from the get-go. You know, we try and create an environment whereby people, you know, the strap line, you know, for me has always been making leadership human. It's one of the joys of doing the work that I do, is that actually we're sector and business agnostic, because it's about the human beings who are making up the team, or the human being who's sat on the other side of the table, or, you know, now occasionally virtually through the screen. But being able to build a dynamic there that, as quick as you can, whereby it's trusted, people can be vulnerable, but all with the underpinned understanding that everyone around the table, or the individual on the other side, wants to continue to grow and improve and unlock potential, either unlock performance within themselves where they aren't at the moment, but they know they can be, or unlock potential that they may not even believe they've got, to take them onto a different realm. And that's, individual, collective, and culturally, but it doesn't really matter what environment they're in. Yes, their environment will shape. So if you're in a toxic culture whereby you can't speak your mind, you're going to feel vulnerable speaking your mind, unless you're very comfortable, being cast out and putting it in an uncomfortable position. Equally, I've seen other environments whereby you've got a CEO who's very comfortable being vulnerable, and that builds trust and psychological safety in others. And there are lots in between all of those scenarios. I guess the joy that I get from doing it is that you're finding out where people are when you start working with them, and then you go through this. It sounds a bit cliched and cheesy, but you do go through this journey with them to hopefully take them on this exponential growth journey that you hold the mirror up to them, see where they're currently operating individually, collectively, culturally, organizationally, and then you take them from day one to however long down the line, and they become hopefully more rounded people, human beings that carries beyond their work, whether it's on field, in office, whatever it may be.
I mean, it's really interesting when I get to meet these people like yourself, and talk about communication, and a lot of it in leadership and things like that. And as I say, I'm a huge sports fan, which is why the majority of the people I've interviewed have been people who've lived and worked through sport. We often look for the secret sauce. Everyone's always looking at the secret sauce, but every single person I speak to, it always boils down to people, and it always boils down to people skills, which is why communication is so important in these situations. You can look at it as technical as you like, and have we lost that ability over the last 15, 20 years where everything became about the technicalities, everything became about the stats and facts, everything became about the information that we get through the internet coming through and social media and everything like that. But I mean, my grandfather was a barley maltster, and he bought barley off Fife farmers, and all he said was, people buy for people. Right, and sometimes it was just a case of sitting in somebody's front room in a farm, having a plate of soup, having a blether, having a chat, and then going, right, here's my price for the barley that year one. Is that okay? And when you strip it all back, as I said, with management, you hear football managers, you hear all these people. It seems like the secret sauce that everyone's looking for is just be better at managing people. Is that something that you've maybe seen as well when sport as well, when it comes to getting all the information, but actually the manager or the coach that's able to just get in between your ears and understand you fully and get the best out of you, the rest takes care of itself?
We could spend all day talking about this, Graham, in all honesty, because I think, you mentioned the data, the world of data, the world of information, insights, all of the different information available to us, business, the sports data, everything is out there. I did a program on Sunday night reflecting on the Wales-Scotland game, and there was an algorithm there that said that based on the field positions of the set pieces that Scotland and Wales both had throughout the 80 minutes, Wales should have won the game 32-21. Right? And naturally, you've got a bunch of folk at home who are saying, that doesn't make any sense. Like, the scoreline was a scoreline. You're taking away from the human element. So I guess that's a prime example whereby if sport was an algorithm, we'd be able to predict every outcome.
Yeah, of course.
Now, sport is something that lots of people latch themselves onto, like yourself, because it's an escape from the day-to-day on a number of occasions, or it's something that is tightly attached to, as a youngster growing up, searching down something that you thought you'd want to do that just carries through your life. And it's for, people who go to Murrayfield on Saturday will go there just loving the passion, the people, the players, the atmosphere, the occasion, the event, a drink or two. Exactly. And I think that, but at the centre of it is people. Yeah. And we look, again, if I just look, I could talk about sport. So when I was at Gloucester, Newcastle, there was a phase whereby data was going through the roof. The number of data points that were captured within matches was increasing, whether it's your tackle stats going from either a missed or made tackle to gain line, collision win, dominant tackle, turnover tackle, whatever it might be. So you ended up with, 6 variances of a tackle. Your kicking distance, hang time, all that stuff was measured. And I remember, but it became almost paralyzing to when presented, because people didn't know, the coaches didn't really know what the data was actually telling them.
Yeah.
And it probably took away from the human element and human decision-making element. And and sport, now rugby, the stats would tell you that the team who kick more in a game win 75% of the time, whatever that, something along those lines. Now, that doesn't just mean that every time you get the ball as a team, you kick it, because if you do that, you win more games. It takes away the fact that, you see Finn with his crossfield kick pass, you see the little dinks over the top, you see the high balls, you see the long kicks, you see the kicks to contest. Now, all of those are feeding in, but it just, and some people might look and say, well, if you kick the ball more, you're going to win the game. So for me, I think data, and in business, the data is there to tell you something, and it's there to be able to guide you in a decision-making process. But I'd say very infrequently is it the only thing that you're making a decision on. And for me, I think the human side of things is something that I love. I worked with a guy recently, and an example would be actually we used the analytics to give him a bit of feedback from his direct reports and peers. And his direct reports highlighted the fact that he didn't use data as part of his delivery to the team. So data didn't matter to him, or their perception was that data didn't matter to him. The reality was, when I held the mirror up to him on this, he said he does the data work beforehand,
right,
and that informs his decision. Now, he doesn't communicate it as part of the decision, but what that did allow him to do is understand the perspective of others in their decision-making process that might be shaped on that. So he then started to communicate, I've done the research, I've looked at the data, and pulling together that in with my intuition, my experience, the framework that I'm going to work in, this is the decision that I've come to.
Okay.
On the flip side of the data, if you're talking about inspiring people, pulling people together to no matter what the role is, to push for the common good and delivery of outcomes, there is nothing better than bringing that to life through story.
Yeah.
And, it's Maya Angelou who says, people will forget what you say, people will forget what you do, but they'll remember how you make them feel.
Yeah.
Something along those lines. And the emotion that story can bring to life is something that I think is often overlooked now, and it's a really key component of a lot of what we do, because it makes sense of complex things. It gives people a deeper understanding as to the sort of why are you doing things, and what is it that we're paints the picture of what it is they're looking to deliver, without the potential clunkiness of getting into the data and the mechanics of it.
I mean, people always say about how we as human beings, we strive for context, which is why you get a lot of people coming up with these theories about why something's happened, so it's got to be because of X, Y, and Z, and until you actually know the facts, you'll never know what the context of that is. But I suppose being able to create a context for people to make better understanding of something, and I'm listening to what you're saying, we're talking about the data, and you're talking about all these data points, I'm thinking, what would your papa, your grandfather have been able to do with all that? But he did do that, because what he was effectively doing was he had the data with all these big sheets that he had, and he was then able to tell the story to the listener as it was happening, using analogies, metaphors, and kind of descriptive language that he was able to do. It is fascinating, but it's about when we look at communicating and coaching and coaches. When you look back over your career, are there particular coaches that stand out through your memories from whatever stage of your playing career, from as a kid playing for your school to your professional career and onwards?
There are loads, Graham. I think, everybody, lots of people ask about, who's the best coach? Who's the best coach I've ever had? The reality is that it would be a combination of a number of the features that came from a lot of them. if I think about the earliest influences, having Dad around, and Gregor around, and chucking a ball about in the garden, and learn loads from them. But I think my schooling days had two PE teachers, rugby coaches at school, in John Foster, that both of whom incredibly sadly have passed away.
Right.
John Foster and Colin Mackay, who were both amazing coaches. They set standards. It was about socks pulled up, garters on, black boots, double bow your laces, look the part, jersey tucked in, and then the standards they set within their teaching, coaching were incredibly high, but they had a warmth to them as well.
Right.
We talk within Kianis a lot about warmth and edge.
Yeah.
And it's something that lands really well with people, because they can recognize it in the people who they work around, they've grown up around, and so on. And what I think for me, the best people are those who balance that warmth and edge, and that's what we see. High performing cultures are those whereby warmth, so that positivity, the psychological safety, the nurturing, supportive environment is in balance with the results, outcomes, high performance, standards, candor. So where both of them are high. So when they're in balance and both are high, you see high performing individuals and teams. And I think if I think of Dean Ryan at Gloucester, was edgy. He was 6'6", gnarly back rower. Lots of people of his vintage would say he was the most horrible bloke to play against. Title winning, Premiership title winning player with Newcastle Falcons in a back row with Pat Lamb packing behind Doddy Weir and George Graham, and in the team with Inga Tuigamala and Matt Burke and Johnny Wilkinson and all these guys.
Some big names in that.
Big names. Yeah. But he was a horrible bloke, and enforcer. But I respected him so much. You knew that he would give you the chance, and he'd give you the platform to succeed. He'd expect high standards, and he wouldn't have a whole lot of warmth about him. But you knew under the surface of it that he cared. At that time there was a really nice yin and yang with Brian Redpath, who a hero of mine growing up, former Scotland scrum half and captain. Brushy and Carl Hogg, who was a teammate of his, Melrose as youngsters. Hoggy was an assistant coach at Edinburgh, who's Jim Telfer's nephew.
Oh, right. Yeah.
So, Hoggy basically thought that Creamy was, Jim Telfer was the way that you needed to be.
Yeah.
Because he had so much success. So Hoggy was all edge, all effort, all fight. Brushy was this little mischievous, yappy scrum half who was all about warmth, arm around your shoulder, pat on the bum, driving standards, but also did it with a huge amount of warmth. And that dynamic down there was a really good dynamic, albeit Brushy had his edgy side at times as well. He was a fierce competitor. All of them hated losing. Yeah. So that was the dynamic that they struggled with. Come off the back of a loss, they were all doer, and they only delivered edge to you. So that as a trio, I think was really great. I think, but when you talk about communication, when it comes to that, sport gave you gives you the natural culture whereby, largely speaking, the vast majority of guys, you could look around and think, he's given his best, he's given his best, he's given his best. He wants to get better. He wants us all to get better. If everyone's of that mindset, you're in a really fortunate position. And you can challenge standards, and you can challenge errors if the errors are based on attitude or effort. Never criticize a skill error if there's effort and attitude that's aligned to it, because we're all human beings. But I've got a number of stories whereby high intensity, high pressure environments. Halftime, and I won't say who the coach was that said this, but we were playing a game away to Sale Sharks one Friday night, miserable winter's Friday night, and Freddie Burns, who went on to win the Premiership with Leicester, and he's been around a load of clubs, but he was a youngster at the time. He and I were scrum half standoff at the time. Sale had Sebastian Chabal, Jason White as their back row, Mark Cueto, Richard Wigglesworth, Charlie Hodgson. They were a good side. But we went up there and we were 6-3 down at half-time. It was a grotty day. And it was all about just trying to dominate field position. And you talk about communication. The coach in charge on that day turned to Freddie and I, sat side by side in this cold dressing room, and said, "Freddie, gun." I was nicknamed Young Gun then. When I got older, Gun. He said, "Burnsy, gun. Listen, there's no grey areas. It's not black and it's not white." And Freddie was sort of nodded as a 20 or 21-year-old. And I was like, what does that mean? No idea. So there's no grey areas, but it's neither black nor white. What does that mean to what we need to do?
Yeah.
And in that moment, I thought, right, I think I've got clarity within myself, but I'm not sure what we're being asked to do. And thankfully, the follow-through was, a bit more detail around clarity around field position, build pressure, and then when it's on to play, we play. But in that moment, in a high pressure environment, and in a short period of the halftime window to after you've got fluids on board, a little snack or whatever, that was the message that you got. You're leaving an awful lot up in the air about what lands in that regard.
It's a fascinating one. It's very similar. I mean, I did not play at a level anywhere near the level that you've played at. I was an amateur, very much with a capital A. And I remember one of the first games I played for Kirkcaldy Seconds. We were playing away at Hamilton, horrible windy day, and I was a sub, and there was only 3 subs or something like that, and there was 2 front rowers, big heavy boys, and myself, and I was meant to be a back row, but I was only 17 or 18 at the time. All got the full gear on, all the warm stuff, and I'm thinking, this is perfect. Or maybe I'll get 5 minutes at the end. Kirkcaldy were winning quite comfortably at the time. There was 2 tries in it, and just before half time, the winger got a bit of a knock, and I'm struggling, and he's the coach, and he said, "Right, Graham, go and get warmed up." I thought, God almighty, I don't want to play, and I don't want to play in the wing. It's the worst place I could be, sort of like horrible windy day, and the wind was sort of in our faces in the second half. So basically, I'm getting changed while the halftime waters are going on board at the side of the pitch. Of course, we're not in this luxury of a dressing room or anything like that. And as I'm walking on, he was a standoff at the time. Older guy, senior player, arm around me. They're going to kick everything down your throat, right? You get that ball and you kick it straight back at them. Okay, just get that ball. Don't care where it goes. Get the ball away. Right, okay. Second row comes to me, big old senior guy. He says, they're going to kick everything down your throat. You get that ball, put it into contact, and we'll do the rest to get the ball. Right? Yeah. And it was this mixed communication.
Yeah.
First thing, ball came down. I looked up. The ball's bounced in front of me, first of all. It's gone over my head. I've gone back, grabbed it, looked up, thought, I'm going to kick it. Kicked it straight in the air, hit the wind, went straight behind me. And the guy came in and picked up the ball, scored a try between the posts. And it was a horrible moment. But I look back, and one of the interesting things is fast forward 10 years or so, and the team Kirkcaldy were playing on a very big crunch match with relegation and stuff like that. And they went out and they were fired up, very, very fired up. I was at the game. And I asked one of my pals, I says, what was the pre-match team talk? Because you guys came out fired up. And he said, we were just in the changing rooms on our own, waiting and waiting and waiting. The coach came in and he says, 5 phases, if it's not on, get rid. Then he walked out again. Mm-hmm. And you're going, there wasn't paper getting stripped off the wall. There wasn't any given Sundays. There wasn't anything like that. Mm. And it just shows you now, you're seeing a lot of, I spoke to Frank Dick about this as well. I've spoken to Neil Lennon about it, and I've said about the importance of keeping your information as simple as possible and as clear as possible, so that because I think as a sports fan, people often assume there's going to be, and like I said, I was at that game, Kirkcaldy, and they came out fired up. They'd done the work during the week, and basically, as I said, the coach just knew 5 phases. If it's not on, get rid.
Yeah, and like there's so much that comes to my mind when you start talking about that. And Andy Robinson, who selected me more for Scotland than any other coach, and he asked me to captain Scotland. Robbo had won the World Cup with Clive Woodward, brought to life the English game plan in that regard, with a golden era of English player. And Robbo came in as head coach of Scotland, and I remember being in a decision in a leaders meeting, I suppose, and he essentially said, right, we want 2 set phases and then the ability to play what we see. And this is something that carried through. Again, if I had my time again, I would step forward and say, and challenge on that,
Right.
and, you know, bring more edge to the equation, and dig deeper into understanding exactly what it is that he meant by that. Because when I looked back at it, and we did this after having played the game, that we went into it with this approach, and I said to Robert, look, we need to, in the review session, we'd gone into the game with this idea, and for anyone who's not a rugby listener, you've got scrum, lineouts, and kickoffs, which are called set pieces, and typically from there, if you have the ball, you will try to move closer to the opposition's line, either through kicking or passing and running. So, and each time there's a tackle and there's a ruck, it's a phase. So he said, right, we'll do 2 of those, and then we play what we see. Okay, so if their guys dropped off and there was space in their defence, we'd attack the space. If the guys had been pulled up and there was space in behind, we might kick, whatever it might be. Now, the only issue with that is that you've got 15 players on the field at any one time, and they've all got different brains. They're playing different positions, and they see a different picture.
Yeah.
And that was where, you know, I pulled Robbo up on the Monday and I said, you've got Jim Hamilton, who's closer to the sun than I am at 6'8", has had to push in a scrum and get up and lift his head and get round the corner. All he's thinking about is, am I smashing a ruck? Am I looking to carry, or am I looking to find space? You've got Ewan Murray, who's even further forward in the scrum, who's basically had a ton of weight going through his shoulders and neck up prop. He's got to get up, and he's just wondering, trying to remember his name because of the exhaustion of that area. And if he's in the picture, he's going to see a different picture. Then you've got someone like Dan Parks or Phil Godman, who's one position outside me, who's going to get the opportunity to lift their head and see things. But it's, for me, that was where the clarity, you need clarity. Yeah. And yes, you need context, but you need people to understand their individual role with delivering what it is for the whole team. And I think for me, that's where communication is often about listening as much as it is talking. Yeah, of course. What Robbo probably missed in that stage was to say, right, you know, go through the 2 phases, pause. What did you see here, Jim? What did you see here, Ewan? What did you see here, Parksy? What did you see here, Rory? And then you're able to actually get the different perspectives that say, is that an approach that we can go with? Or do we need to look at doing things differently?
I suppose like that element of creativity and thinking on your feet is great to have. Frank Dick talked about a situation with the England team on a tour in Argentina where they purposely didn't let when the England team were expecting to go to their training session on tour in Argentina, the bus just never arrived. So what the situation was, Eddie Jones and themselves have set it up to say, let's just see how they work that out, and we want to try and get them to think so that when they're on the pitch, when things aren't going well or when things are going well, but that element, but at the same time, understanding that everybody has their own individual role and responsibility in that process, because as you said, if you've got 15 different brains, you've got 15 different potential ideas, which is sometimes good to have when you're wanting to have outside thinking, cognitive diversity and stuff like that. But at the same time, it's finding that right balance when actually I know what my role is here.
Yeah, and look, I talk about 15 people. The reality is that decision makers are on field. There's probably 3 who have a direct decision as to what's going to happen in any given period. The scrum half, who's going to be first into the ball, he chooses whether to hit the forward runners or put the ball through the fly half or a back's hands, or run themselves. Yeah. And you've got the receiver in that regard, and they're in that decision-making process. So they're the ones that need to be able to play what you see. But nowadays, you've got to have everybody else on the same page. And I think this is where, you know, whether in business or sport, you've got to know what the frameworks are that you're a part of. Yeah. And then we talk about it's a military term actually that is the prize, whereby you talk about strategy or strategic intent. What is it that we're looking to deliver? Then you bring that to life through the power of story. So paint the picture through story that makes it more straightforward to people. And then you talk about the freedoms and constraints within that. So where are the constraints that we're going to hold you to. So where are the guardrails that we want you to operate within? But then also within that, you've got the freedom to express yourself. And that's in any job, in any walk of life, in any role. We've all got things that we're brilliant at that we need to do more of. We've all got areas that we need to grow in, that we need to get better at. And we've all got those areas that maybe aren't needed, that might be strengths, but there's no need to bring them into the equation. So that's the freedoms and constraints. Then you need the dialogue off the back of it, that back and forth that says, right, I've heard this, Graham. What does that? And now I'm thinking, for me, that means this. And you either agree or disagree, and we take the dialogue in that direction. But the prize is disciplined initiative, which sounds like an oxymoron, discipline and the initiative. But it's being able to stay disciplined within the big picture, the overall strategy of what it is we're looking to deliver. But you've also got this freedom to play in and show the initiative that you have in that regard without damaging or putting at risk, at unwarranted risk, the outcomes of what you deliver. And I think it's something that carries right across the board, business, sport. If you get those things in place, you've got the ability to create a bit of magic.
That's fascinating. I want to go back to what you mentioned about warmth and edge, having that different thing. Talking about being a truly authentic person and stuff like that, and everyone says authenticity is really, really important. Two sides to it. If you're authentic and you're just a really nice, warm guy, and then one day you want to turn up and be like, no, I need to have the edge, is that difficult for people to suddenly go, what's he talking about? I know what he's like. He's he's suddenly trying to be, or the other way, if you know you mentioned about your one of the players that you played with who just was all edge, you would be really unsettled if this guy started trying to be nice to you and pouring you cups of tea and helping you out. So is there a situation, or is there something that people can look at if they do this reflection that you're talking about and they become a little bit more aware? Maybe I'm a bit too warm and I need a bit more edge, but then finding that right balance, or maybe I'm just too edge and I need just to make it a little bit more warmer.
Yeah, it's not an overnight.
No,
it's not something that you just click the fingers and you say, right, typically I'm supportive, positive for people, optimistic, but tomorrow I'm going to go in and I'm going to beat the doors down and I'm just going to focus on outcomes, delivery, finances, whatever it might be. But it's for me, I would say, if you take yourself up in a drone view, whatever you see, if you think that a shift is going to improve your performances as a leader, or the performance of others or the organization, then it's not so much a choice, it's an obligation. You've got an obligation to change, to enhance you or those who you're leading's performance in that regard. And we use the self-evaluation data that we capture as a platform for dialogue. So it but then it's also, we're not just giving people data and saying, Graham, you've got an edge of 90, you've got warmth of 50, go away and work on your warmth. we actually get into, right, what's the challenge here? How do you go about changing it? Where are the focus areas? Who's that going to be with? When might that opportunity present itself? Or when can you create, or could you create the first opportunity to maybe just dial up that warmth that little bit to make a bit of a change? And it's an iterative process over time, but when people start seeing the impact that it has, it's remarkable. I mean, I've got one of my old teammates, great pal Nick DeLuca, from Scotland days, Edinburgh days. Nick when he was playing would be very edgy. He would speak his mind. He would speak with candor. And some people struggled with it a bit, and he's now director of sport at Merchiston up in Edinburgh, and he is now, the warmth that he comes with is enormous, and he's gone through a big shift himself, and that will be reflecting back on sport, and that again will have been an iterative process, but. Nick and I, we've spoken a bit about the Kiana stuff, and he engages with it in amongst, his desire to push himself to get better, and now in his role he's got obligation to grow the kids that he works with. So for him, really interestingly, we actually did a call to a potential client a couple of months ago, and given that on field it would be all about edge and delivery, and drive and candour, we came off the call and Nick actually said to me, I said, look, let's catch up and we'll go through the how the call went and so on. And I said, look, what are your thoughts on how the call went the day after? And he said, Rory, how do you like to receive feedback? And it was a remarkable question because he's the sort of guy. And then I naturally then said to him, to the point, give it to me straight. I want your candour, but I want it done in a manner that says, I think this was great. This could have been done significantly better. This is how you would have done it. And then for the next time we'll do X, Y, and Z. And then I fed back similarly. But that question in itself is something that all too often we don't take into account when it comes to warmth and edge, and how we communicate. And a lot of us are fixed in our ways. Whereas actually, if you think about that, if I said to you, Graham, I want to have a word. How do you like to receive feedback? Yeah. And I then give you a voice and show you that I'm willing to listen.
Make it nice and soft for me, please.
Well, exactly. Okay, I'm not going to do that because that wasn't good enough. But no, it gives you a sense of being heard. Yeah. And that, as a question, is something that it really caught me off guard, but it's something that is a really good platform to then, warmth and edge is something that I don't think we need to be stuck in our ways. Leadership behaviour in general is not fixed. No. It's bloody difficult to change, but the prize for changing it is massive. And I think that's where, looping right back to your question, for me, if people are of a fixed mindset that they are who they are, then that's a difficult thing to change. If people want to become better at what they're doing, the impact that they have on others, the role that they deliver, the organisation, the team, whatever it might be, and we're able to help them identify areas that they can get better, then it's over to the individual to own that. And that's a big thing that we try. If the individual owns the change, it's much more likely to continue to reward them, rather than being told, Graham, you need to do this. Yeah. If I build a sense of you owning your own change and identifying for yourself where in your own context you can improve doing things, that's pretty magic.
I mean, a lot of that comes down to the sort of golden word is awareness. We've talked a lot about reflection, but awareness is so important. I talk about when we do the public speaking communication training courses, and we're saying about awareness of yourself, awareness of how you speak, how you are, what kind of speaker you are, what you're doing when you're speaking, but also awareness of the audience, who you're speaking to, how they're going to receive the message and stuff like that. When you're talking about trying to change someone's behaviour, they have to first of all be aware of their own behaviour first before they know what they need to change. How difficult is that, or what could somebody do to try and help somebody on the path to this behavioural change through creating awareness? Because everyone thinks they're great at what they do.
Well, yes, I think self-awareness is a fundamental building block of being wise, being effective, in any walk of life. I think it's one. When do you think you became self-aware?
I say about a year and a half ago.
Really?
Yeah, really worked on it. It was when I was doing the executive coaching qualification, where awareness was such a big thing. Listening became a big thing, and suddenly you realise, how much do I talk, and reflection became a big part of that. So I would have to think back, and I'm thinking about your colleague that you're saying. If you are all edge, if you're aware of that, then you know how to soften the edge, right? and things like that. And
I guess in simplistic terms, self-awareness, aware of who you are. Now, we do an exercise which is an absolute privilege to do, whereby we look back, or we allow individuals to look back at their early experiences that shape them as a person, and that's an unbelievable way of actually understanding who you are, and therefore that build self-awareness. And, it's also an incredible way of building trust and with people. And essentially, I'm sat opposite you or in the team environment. I don't really care what your job title is. At the moment, I don't really care about what your responsibilities are. I want to be able to understand you as a person. What makes you up? What are your, what's the fuel and the experiences that you've had that now feed into the self-awareness? But also, by doing that, you deepen your own self-awareness. And I think that's an amazing starting point. Then we use the Kianis Leadership Index, which is the self-evaluation tool. And we use that as you'd score yourself between 1 and 10 on a number of 70 characteristics that you don't know that what you're answering to. They're just statements. And it's typically intuitive. We know that it's a snapshot, a moment in time. It's not going to be definitive about who you are, but we use that as a basis of dialogue with regards to further deepen the self-awareness. So very early on, we're looking at that self-awareness. And then throughout the process, we bring in a number of tools and frameworks, and then also other analytics that give you feedback from more senior people, your peers, and more junior people in the business who know you well as a leader, both data and verbatim comments that are anonymized, that allow you to build a greater understanding as to whether your self-awareness, how you view yourself, is how others view you. And if you imagine when you do it in a psychologically safe environment, whereby also there are times whereby I need to show you edge to say in that environment, but I'm on your team. I want you to get better. If you want to be part of that, then brilliant. If you don't, then we're probably not going to have worked together for that long to even get to that stage, because you probably wouldn't be sat in front of me. But I think that's where the self-awareness side of things, we're all, the best operators you see are always working on that. And that's not a case of rolling over and being the person that others think you should be. It's for you to take ownership of where you identify the opportunities to deliver different behaviors that can deliver different results, and then you get to iterative process, incremental growth that compounds over time, and before you know it, you're growing into a different space.
I think if you asked me that question, it's kind of threw me off a little bit, but when you actually I think back to it, it was in a group environment where we had sort of broken all that kind of boundaries and barriers of psychological danger, so it was a completely safe place, and it was a bit of deep thinking about. It was actually John Stiskowski who I've also interviewed, and we talked to on the podcast about authenticity and bullshit, and sometimes we talked about, he uses an analogy of the M6 down in England, and he said if you stop at every stop, the more authentic you are, the more north you'll go, but when you finish in Gretna and be your true authentic self, you'll be surrounded by nobody, because when you really are your own authentic self, then you speak your mind on everything. Where we always have to sort of change that element a little bit when you're speaking to people, because, as I've said, if you're all edge and that's you, if I'm all edge, my family aren't going to like me because my pals aren't going to like me. Versus, if you want everybody to like you, then you'll just be the yes guy and you'll be off at the first stop, but you'll be surrounded by loads and loads of people. And the bullshit side of things, I had the quietest 5 minutes of my life at the Stand in Edinburgh when I tried to be a stand-up comedian.
Really?
And but what I do say is that sometimes to embellish a story or to make you have to add that little element in. Billy Connolly would always said that he called himself a liar quite a few times because his stories weren't exactly the truth, and he hated when people who he knew were in the audience, because they'd be sitting there going, well, that never happened. But if he told it as it actually happened, he wouldn't be selling out stadiums or selling out arenas and stages and things like that. So when you start to break down yourself, I found that first of all, a very cathartic experience to go, making a bit more of awareness. But then also the importance of, once you become more aware of yourself, it helps you to be aware of other people, and you can start to pick up on their nuances and things. And when it comes to leading people and managing people and communicating with people, you'll know there's a group of people I can say this to, whereas I definitely couldn't say that to that group of people.
Yeah.
And when we're communicating, it's important to know how aware you are of yourself, but also your audience. And when you're in a sporting environment, how many times have we heard, and we've talked about it earlier on, that people management, you'll have had coaches in your own career that you would run through a brick wall for, and they had that balance absolutely spot on. I mean, when we're trying to teach people to be more aware of others and their audience when communicating, what kind of things could we look at for that then?
Well, again, depends on the audience. You know, I guess if I consider the different environments that I may be in, if you start in a team environment, people that you know, and coming back to the authenticity, like authentic leadership, you know, is something that is spoken about. A lot of people, when asked, you know, who is the best leader that you've been led by, they would talk about authenticity, and I think that is important. But I think for me, authenticity is about being who you are and sharing why you are who you are and what your drivers are, and you know what's important to you. Authenticity, being authentic, doesn't give you the license to damage other people.
No, yeah,
and how they feel. You know, I think it's and there can be a fine line. You know, when people say, "Well, I was just being authentic."
Well, I'd heard the book Radical Candor.
Yeah.
It took a big nosedive in terms of it got a lot of bad publicity because everybody read this book as the next Bible of how to be. But what they would say is they'd say something really horrible to somebody going, "Oh, well, I'm just being radically candor."
Yeah.
And as if by saying, "Oh, I'm just being radically candor," it meant that, well, take it as you will, but it could still be offensive and hurtful.
With candor, and again, this is another thing that you know, candor is so important. You know, with regards to with delivery of outcomes, being able to say it as it is. So we talk about the candor curve actually. So if you imagine you've got candor on your horizontal axis, performance on your vertical axis, and the status quo in the bottom corner. And essentially the candor, if you're asked to draw what the candor curve is, different people draw different things, but it's essentially a bell curve whereby performance increases as candor increases. And then you get into an area what we would call the optimum candor zone, whereby candor is high, but there's also a cliff edge whereby you can be candid, but you're also getting into this dangerous territory whereby you damage people's confidence. Yeah. And that's where performance drops off. It's a cliff edge of performance. When you reach, and typically what we're saying is, when you reach the stage whereby you're being so candid that you are damaging people's confidence or how they feel about themselves, or a team environment like that, you fall off the cliff edge, and that's incredibly difficult to come back from. So I think that's something, when it comes to candor, being able to call things out is very important. High performing environments, you need candor, but there is also this cliff edge. There is a precipice that a number of people, you know, when you hold the mirror up to them and ask them, you know, where they might put themselves on it, they're saying, I'm a bit close to the precipice. Let's dial that back a little bit. And it might just be that balancing a little bit more warmth within there, that so the candor, the edge doesn't necessarily come down that much. You're just bringing a few parts of warmth into the equation, that little bit more. But it is, you know, that for me is a really important dynamic. And you know, I have this with my wife all the time. You know, India will say to me, just say what you want. You know, because I'll probably dance around some things and try and come about it from a warmth perspective. She'll be like, yeah, just tell me what you want, tell me what you need. So she might be on the other side, whereby she's so candid that, you know, I go into the corner and sit crying. But no, it's, you know, it's my awareness again when it comes to where I've been reflecting on things and where I want to be. It's an area that is a constant scenario, and one that, as you referenced earlier on, can change from person to person. So, you know, delivering a message to an audience, you've got to being able to engage people throughout knowing that everybody's wired differently. Everyone has different backgrounds and different drivers, and have different things going on in life at that time. Being able to engage them, sometimes you've got to call a name, Graham.
Yeah.
In that team meeting, to be able to get people's attention. Otherwise, other times see people are fully engaged. You've got to be able to sometimes change the operating rhythm of things, but the authenticity bit is something that is a difficult one to manage, because at times you've got to understand what you stand for. That's the starting point.
Yeah.
Because then you can be authentic, and then when you bring other factors into play, you understand self-awareness, seeing others' perspectives. So where are the other people? Where's my audience in this regard? And then searching for the common good. So is the message that I'm delivering for the common good, and is it going to propel us forwards, or is there a danger that I'm being candid and authentic here and it's going to damage people's confidence?
I mean, it's a lot of it's trust as well. If you know that if an audience or a person, if someone's saying something and that they're not being themselves here, they're just any tell that you can get where you go, I'm not getting that. Yeah. Suddenly, if you detect there's a lack of authenticity in that, your level of trust completely goes.
Yeah, it's very similar to that. You've got to try and get trying to build back trust is difficult.
Yeah.
Trying to generate. I'm always interested, as someone who is probably too trusting in people as soon as I meet them.
Right.
I almost give trust for people to lose. Others have it hand it to the individual to build trust in them, and there's lots of areas in between. But how do you build trust? Being aware enough as to how you're going to build trust individually or across a team or an organization is something that doesn't just happen by magic. You need to have an intention and have a bit of a plan as to how you go about doing it.
Yeah, and shaping your communication and how you go about doing that as well. The last wee bit that I always ask guests is what their key fundamentals are in communication. You've had a career that's seen you playing at international level, captaining Scotland, and obviously now into the business world. I'm putting you on the spot a little bit, but from your whole career that you've had, if you were to start to look at the key fundamentals of communication, what would you say they are?
I think it varies. I'm not trying to sit on the fence here, and I guess I might end up talking myself into the fundamentals that kind of wrap around all of them. But I think clarity. I think the clarity from the get-go as to, firstly, who's the audience and what's the message that I'm looking to get across to them is a really good starting point. Because if I reflect, if I think about whether as a captain in sports, or I launched and ran my own business afterwards. So somebody in that role whereby you're making decisions all the time and you're communicating all the time, or now into working with leaders and leadership teams or the broadcast side of things. It's who's the audience and what's going to land best for them is a really good starting point. And in keynotes, I'm always really conscious that if I'm delivering a keynote to a client, I want to know about who the audience is.
Yeah.
Where are their pain points, or where's their anxiety focused at the moment? Where's the business at on the whole? What's my audience how are they going to be feeling? Because then I can start shaping a story around that. And so I think being able to have clarity as to who the audience are and what the message is that you're looking to deliver. The listening side of things is a big part of that. From there, I guess it's building out the bit that's going to land. Okay, and I think story is always a factor within that. Yes, there are data points, there are experiences worth sharing. There's a decision-making framework maybe in how you go about doing things, but I think being able to bring it to life through story is something that I always feel. And Papa wouldn't just talk about a player and what they actually looked like.
No.
He'd talk about the late great Doddy Weir, being like, he runs like he's a mad giraffe. So, that brings it to life. Or, Brian Redpath, former coach of mine, he's as slippery as a baggy up a border burn. These little moments that paint a picture. Chuck Jacobson, my old teammate, when I did the tribute evening to Papa at Murrayfield after he passed away, and I went around, Chris Patterson asked him, did Papa ever give any one-liners? He was like, oh, none that I can remember, because Chris Patterson never kicked a ball like 3 pund of haggis. But Chuck Jacobson said to me, he said, Gun, my favourite thing your Papa ever said about me, he said, there he is, Alan Jacobson from Preston Pans. He's like an oxo cube on legs. So I think for me, it's communicating anything, you want to get clarity of message. You want to bring people's senses to life. So you want people to you want to drive emotion or insight through the senses. Paint the picture that allows them to see what it is that the message that you're looking to get across, and feel the message that you're going to get across, not just be told what it is that you're trying to deliver. And that's where data can become a part of it, and it can feed it, but it's got to be able to feed the story. And I think there's got to be a balance of challenge and victory or happiness or fun that comes through within it. And I think if you build all of that together within the message that you're communicating, you're not going to go an awful way wrong within it. And context is so important, because if I'm a coach standing at halftime, needing to give a team who's up against it a rocket, then there's not going to be that much fun or humour within it.
No.
But what I do need to do is paint a picture of what my expectation is, bring the emotion to life, but also get into the detail of how they're going to deliver that. I think there's the how at the end of the what and the why needs to be really important, because then people need to feel empowered to go or enabled to go and deliver the message that I'm looking to get across to them.
Brilliant. Well, look, that's been absolutely fantastic, and I'm all set for going down the park and having a wee run about a rugby ball this afternoon. I think, Rory, if you want to join me. But how can anyone find you? Is it through social media? How can they find out what you're doing, keep up to date with what's going on, or even if they've listened to this and want to maybe get in touch with Kianis, how can they go around doing that then?
Yeah. So Rory Lawson at Kianis.com, or any of the socials, people, it's Twitter or Instagram or LinkedIn. I think all of this stuff, I'm always happy to have conversations with people and share any insights I've got that can make them better.
Well, Rory, thank you so much for coming in today. I really, really appreciate it. Cheers.
Thanks, Graham.